Hello, everybody. I'm the moderator of this session. To introduce myself, my name is Georg Serenci, and I advise companies in the digital sector in the areas of strategy, regulation, competition, spectrum policies, and innovation. You can find more about my work and my thinking on my website. To kick off the panel, let me briefly share with you a few introductory remarks. The European Commission is constantly bringing new legislative proposals, the Digital Markets Act, Service Act, Artificial Intelligence Act, Data Act, Chips Act, etc., in addition to the already known ones, such as the GDPR. With this, Europe is positioning itself as a global regulatory superpower. Combined with the so-called Brussels effect, Europe is acting like a referee on the digital economy playing field. But the referee doesn't make the game. We need to get Europe more effective on the playing field of the digital economy to be more successful. The European Commission's efforts to achieve greater strategic autonomy to increase Europe's digital sovereignty are important. But the recent study by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation shows that Europe has hardly recognized the consequences of its massive digital dependency as indicated by the Digital Dependency Index. The regulatory orthodoxy often views regulatory policy in isolation and unfortunately disconnected from markets and innovation. Europe, to a large extent, lacks a smart combination of regulation and industrial policy and innovation policy. Only when we succeed in synchronizing industrial and innovation policy with regulation, we will be able to attract more investment more successfully. And with this, we will also be able to accelerate broadband expansion. Then there will be also fewer startups that emigrate to the US or Singapore or elsewhere after being supported with taxpayers' money. So this concludes my short introduction. Before I'm handing over to the first speaker, let me remind all speakers to keep their intro statement between 4 and 5 minutes max to allow sufficient time for the discussion. Now I'm handing over to Professor Konstantinos Marcellos. Kostas is president of the Hellenic Telecommunications and Post Commission and incoming chair of BEREC. Kostas, the floor is yours. Obviously, there is an issue with Kostas. It's not showing up here. Okay, so if Kostas is not available, let me then move on to the next speaker. And the next speaker in the row is Gérard Pogorel, Economic and Social Sciences Department of Telecom Paris Tech. Gérard advocates for more breathing space for actors. He will elaborate on how will the 6G ecosystem evolve and what are friendly and unfriendly ecosystems. Gérard, the floor is yours. Gérard, you are muted.
Yes, thank you, Georg. So yes, actually, what I wanted at the outset of this session and at this rather early stage of thinking about the future setup and the future regulatory framework of 6G, I'd like to insist upon a few high-level considerations connected to what you just said, Georg, the general perspective of the European economy, the place of Europe in the world, and its competitivity, its ability to innovate. So maybe this can sound a little bit far away from technologies, but I think at this early stage, like I said, it's important to look at the big picture and see where 6G stands in the general picture of the future economic the considerations for Europe and the future place of Europe in the world. So please, the third thing I would like to insist, slide please, is that this slide can seem to you very obvious, but what I want to emphasize here is that we should be careful not to take a too technological or too financial approach to the future of 6G, because there has been a habit, which I think is a bad habit in the past few years and along the history of 3G, 4G, 5G, when we speak about future technologies and the future users of spectrum and the frequencies the new technologies will need. Some people have, you know, a first reaction, oh, that's interesting, we'll have to auction out spectrum. No, this is not the issue. The issue is not auction out spectrum. Of course, spectrum will be needed, but what we have to focus on is the use, the social, the economic, the business use of the spectrum, and the benefits the new technology will bring to our work environment, to our entertainment, and to our education. So the first order of priority is put together a regulatory framework, including frequency assignment, which is really focused on the objective of public policy and not, well, of course, there's a financial consideration, but not the financial consideration is not the priority. So let's look at the next slide. And the problem here is that this is something we've been working on with my colleague who is and friend who is also present today, Eric Bolin. There are core principles to be considered when looking at what we want to put in place for 6G. There are lessons from the past 15 years. The issue is to maximize the return on the return for society, not the return on public assets. The state is not a private agent. The state doesn't try to maximize the return on its own assets. Otherwise, in the UK, the Buckingham Palace would have been put on auction and assigned to the highest bidder, maybe a Russian plutocrat. So the state is here to implement public objectives, and the hydro spectrum is a public resource which has to serve the public interest, not just the interest of the Minister of Finance, but the interest of the public at large. So the state cannot behave as a private entity, maximizing its own income or maximizing the value of spectrum. The spectrum has no value in itself. It has no intrinsic value. The only value of spectrum is the benefits it brings to society. So the problem we have here is we shouldn't start on the wrong foot, starting by auctioning out spectrum and putting a huge burden, billions, tens of billions of euros or dollars or whatever, on investors, on telecom operators. That's a bad idea. So we should give them breathing space, and instead of burdening the operators with huge spectrum fees, we should find ways to accommodate both the necessary competitive environment of the mobile industry and the necessity for the operators to invest huge sums. So, and this will be my last slide, and it refers very directly to what Georg just said. Please put all the, yes, okay. So what we have to look into, and regarding 6G, and here I look at it from a European or European viewpoint, we have to think about 6G within a more general economic and industry framework, which I called the 3 circles framework. So given the general circumstances, the lessons from the pandemic, the lessons from the trade tensions, and the lessons from, unfortunately, for the new international environment with the resurgence of imperialist, nationalist endeavors. So we have to think of Europe as a core area where our strategies, our digital strategies, have to be coordinated. So we have a first circle, which we have to focus on, which is the EU ecosystem. But then, as you also said, given this general environment, we have to look at this also with our partners. And this is the second circle. Europeans, we have partners, we have allies. There are countries which share our values, which share our vision of the world, and we have to coordinate with them. It doesn't, and we have to be careful not to repeat the errors of the past. We have to coordinate with the US like we do in the Transatlantic Technology Partnership. We have to coordinate with Japan. We have to coordinate with Australia, and it will be made easier, I think, with the new government just elected. We have to coordinate with Korea. We have to coordinate with Taiwan, Taiwan being an important element of the world, the democratic digital economy in the world. So those are the first 2 circles. And then we have a third circle, which is even more delicate than the others and consists of areas where countries with whom we have huge economic and technology relationships. Europe, China, the US are very strongly integrated technologically. This level of integration might be decreasing, but it won't go away. So we have to build upon our strengths to establish a balance of power with China. And this is what our diplomats are doing every day. But we have to be very clear, and this will be my conclusion, that 6G today has to be looked into in a different framework from yesterday, and we have to be very strict on the way to consider those 3 circles. Each of them is very important, but they are distinct. So we will have EU ecosystems, we'll have 2 partners to establish ecosystems with our partners, and we'll have to reinforce from our viewpoint the mutual trust circles with countries with which we have strong relationships, which are not our allies. So that's I think, I'm sorry, maybe it's a bit high level, but I think not to repeat the errors of the past, this is the framework I would propose for us to look into in the future. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Gerard. And I think your inspiring views rhyme very well with the overall title of this session. That's we need a regulatory revolution. So it sounds a bit revolutionary, which I like. In the meantime, I've seen that Kostas was able to connect. So let me briefly, before handing over to Kostas, Professor Konstantinos Marcellos is president of the Hellenic Telecommunication and Post Commission and the incoming chair of BEREC. So Kostas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Georg, and it is really great to be among you today in the 6GSymposium. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate to this very interesting panel discussion. And please accept my apologies for being late in connecting. I'm following FTTH's Europe event in parallel, so. I will start with 5G networks, my opening statement. 5G networks deployment progresses fast in many countries, and more operators around the world provide 5G services. The number of subscribers increases rapidly, and the total number of 5G subscriptions was estimated near 600 million by the end of 2021. And this fuels expectations that 5G will become the fastest adopted mobile radio technology ever. But of course, 5G has a long way to go before it reaches its full potential, but the discussion on 6G has already started. And this is what we discussed today. So this comes at no surprise, as extensive research and development regarding the technical aspects, the use cases, and the business models is needed, as well as decisions about standardization and spectrum allocation. 6G is a new wireless communication standard in the wider sense. 6G networks will be able to use higher frequencies than 5G networks and provide substantially higher capacity and much lower latency. This will extend the performance of 5G applications. It will also expand the scope of capabilities to support new and innovative applications. 6G, I believe, will also be the first radio technology that will extensively utilize AI techniques in its core network and run orchestration in signal conditioning, power savings, and more. As with 5G evolution, the trend for 6G will be towards increased bandwidth, increased coverage, increased volumes of data, and lessons learned and to be learned from 5G will still be relevant in all key forms: industrial use cases, millimeter wave coverage, and mobility, uplink performance, etc. 5G experiences, especially in the use of millimeter wave frequencies, will play without a doubt a key role in our wireless 6G future. So it is critical to make sure today that when deploying 5G networks, we will tend to utilize their potential and will accept the challenge to move beyond the traditional high-mast antenna runs. We need to start thinking in hyper-dense network terms, consider small cells as the most important paradigm shift of our decade in radio network planning, and embrace it as such. It is certain that 6G multi-gigabit links will have to utilize frequency bands above 26 gigahertz, and 110 to 170 gigahertz bands are discussed as we speak. These frequencies don't travel distances, so for the kind of network density that would actually be needed, hypersense probably falls short of delivering at the scale. As in early 5G planning days, regulators across the world need to conduct in-depth analysis in order to understand the conditions future implementation of 6G networks will need to face and deal with, and timely identify possible challenges and topics related to this matter. The challenges that we will need to address include, but will not be limited to, work on standards, interoperability, new business models, spectrum availability, coverage, quality of service, sustainability, security and resilience, always keeping in mind that over-regulation prevents innovation, especially in the cases of emerging technologies and ecosystems. As BEREC identified in the case of 5G, that we should not rush early with regulations, this will probably need to be the case with 6G. When 5G introduction was at a very early and experimental phase in the European Union, BEREC understood that it was too early to pinpoint and analyze the regulatory aspects of 5G, so preferred to just identify the regulatory aspects that may need BEREC's attention in the future. That approach gave birth to BEREC's 5G radar, which is practically a tool for identifying developments in the 5G ecosystem that may need regulatory attention. Currently, BEREC prepares a report on the 5G value chain, capitalizing on its 5G radar experience. We recognize that regulators need to be fully aware of the relevant evolutions, but in equal terms, we recognize that we should avoid promoting regulation at early stages. As regards 6G, we also expect to face challenges on spectrum allocation, for which our decision calendar points to the World Radio Communication Conferences of 23 and 27. Having said the above, decision makers and regulators, I believe that should in the coming years give a serious thought in the implementation of regulatory sandboxes. This tool has been used in other sectors, but not in the electronic communications field yet. Regulatory sandboxes are practically about avoiding all regulatory restrictions at early stages, with the regulator being very actively involved in monitoring each and every process of a new technology entering a market in a collaborative manner. During the anticipation of 6G introduction, for which innovation is key, BEREC could consider the use of sandboxes for the issues of spectrum allocation, licensing, and the arrangements between market players with the support of the relevant stakeholders. There is much to tell, but more importantly, much to do. So BEREC and each and every single regulator in Europe, as well as around the world, should roll its sleeves up and while everyone's attention is on 5G rollout, start planning our 6G future, sandboxed or not, to make sure continue promoting always faster, always better telecommunication services for all of us. And with this, I conclude my opening statement. I'm really looking forward to the discussion that will follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Kostas. I'm very much looking forward to see how BEREC will foster or motivate regulators to use regulatory sandboxing. A very good idea. So thank you again for this, and thank you for sharing your views. The next speaker in our row here for the introductory remarks is Eric Polin. Eric is Professor of Digital Strategy and Innovation at Chalmers University. And Eric will share with us very interesting things. Eric, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. The session title here is, why do we need a regulation revolution? So there is obviously a presumption of big changes ahead. And I will bring across 3 points as a first set of questions for this statement or for the discussion, whether we are really in an evolution stage or revolution stage. But my 3 points will go in the same direction of sort of rethinking and perhaps reducing regulation aspects, but the other one perhaps increasing. So the first point being, what about digital autonomy and 6G? Professor Fogorel pointed a very interesting overall context of where we are and the need for thinking broadly. And we are approaching a time where the strategic autonomy and digital autonomy is growing into a quite fundamental EU objective. And if that is so, and pressing world events are sort of pushing step by step the EU into thinking in this way, what about these fundamental and important technologies? Can we think about a policy framework where we find both 5G, but especially 6G, as serving these overall objectives of strategic autonomy? Or are these topics completely unrelated or orthogonal to each other? Can one find linkages between what's going to happen in Europe in 6G and the need for autonomy? So that's my first question. The second 2 questions are a little bit more, say, traditional within the telecom policy regime, and that is, what about spectrum assignment? And of course, we have spectrum allocation through the WRC and so on. We will define what spectrum bands will be available for 6G, but after that comes assignment. And assignment in the EU, and I may come back to that in the discussion point, is very varied, as we know. We have a long history of debate within the European Union of what we could call federalism in assignment versus subsidiarity. And this has happened in many types of initiatives, but we could say basically that subsidiarity has always won. But still, and we find, if we look at the 5G scene, we find very big variations, just in terms of reserve prices, auction outcomes, coverage obligations, and so on. So what about then the 6G? Professor Pogorel already alluded to that in terms of having assignment to serve in the public interest, not just the public, I mean the society interest, not generally the state interest, but the society interest. So that is a big question ahead. And then finally, another question that I wanted to address, which is also typical of the sort of telecom regime talks, and that is inclusion, to find ways where the technology is available and accessible to all. And obviously that's going to be a significant challenge, because we can imagine that if 5G is expensive to deploy, say universally, 6G will have probably even greater challenges. And these last 2 points suggest some maybe evolutionary rethinking of scaling back or thinking in new ways, while the first point on autonomy is a more expansionist point, where but I don't have the answers, I'm sorry to say. I just wanted to raise the questions for the debate. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Eric, for linking 6G so nicely with regulation and spectrum issues. I think that is part of the regulation, the future regulation, which we all need. So I'm now moving on to the last but not the least speaker. It's Heidi Himanen. She's Chief Advisor for Trafficom, the Finland's regulator. And Heidi concludes the first round of these intro statements, and she will speak about a new structured 6G vision flow from societal goals to capabilities, in which actions Trafficom is taking towards 6G. Heidi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, as you know, Finland is one of the forerunners, or the forerunner of 5G. We have assigned the spectrum for 5G, the pioneer bands in EU already several years ago, and also our operators have built already 80% of population coverage with 5G networks, and we have assigned also spectrum for private and local networks. And we are also I think the forerunners in 6G research, development, and innovation, as the world's first research program in 6G was started in Finland, the 6G flagship. So I'm going straight to the 6G discussion, and we think that we need a kind of new structured 6G vision flow from societal goals to capabilities. And this is the work we have done together with the 6G flagship of the University of Oulu. This is the vision. We think that how to come from societal impact to capabilities. We need not only to develop technologies, but really understand what is the benefits for our people and our society. And that's why we think of this vision flow. It's really important to have the the main goals in mind as we develop new technology, and the users, the different use cases, but then also to understand the future examples. I think these are the ones that help us describe for the great audience what 6G is about, for them to understand the real examples and use cases. And then coming to enabling technologies and the capabilities or indicators. All these set the scene, and they motivate the need for a new kind of regulation and spectrum. So we think that this is what we need to understand first, and this is what motivates the need for the, as you say, regulatory revolution. Next slide, please. So I want just to describe from a perspective of a regulator how we work in Finland towards 6G. So we're coming to spectrum. This is all the new spectrum that we see, that we have in mind when working towards 6G. So there is spectrum in the low band, in mid band, and the high bands. And just to highlight this 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz band as a potential band, common European band for local spectrum, as we have already assigned 2.3 gigahertz and 25 gigahertz for local networks, but this could be the common European spectrum band. And also there is work going on, as you know, in 6 gigahertz band could be quite important. Even uptake of 6 gigahertz already for 5G before we even have 6G could be a possibility, at least in Finland. We support trials heavily. We have made spectrum available for trials. It's quite straightforward to get the spectrum license for trialing in Finland, and also our MNOs are quite positive in allowing trials from third parties in their spectrum, and support the technology evolution. So going from 2G to 3G and to 4G and 5G. Internationally, we work in ITU with the IMT 2030 visionary work. And the previous slide will be also our input for that. In the EU Radio Spectrum Policy Group, there is work for 6G development, and I am co-chairing that subgroup. So we are really putting efforts into this work, and also in the European Space Agency's 5G, 6G work is really essential to enable the non-terrestrial components. And looking forward also to work on 6G then in RSCOM, CEPT, and BEREC. Regulation, these are just some hints of what kind of things we need to work with on regulation. But these are things we have in mind already. We have some new regulation in place for 5G cybersecurity, and we have realized there is a need in a different way now for looking into cybersecurity also in 5G and 6G networks. And of course, the licensing regimes, dynamic spectrum use and sharing of spectrum and infrastructure. The last thing I want to emphasize is cooperation. We don't do this alone. We are supporting the research, development, and innovation in Finland and internationally, but also we are cooperating. We are taking input from them, and also in very tight cooperation with the 6G flagship and the newly founded 6G Finland for all the R&D organizations working with 6G in Finland. We have a 5G momentum ecosystem by Traficom, has been working for 4.5 years to share information to anybody interested on 5G and for vertical use and implementation, both for implementers and for users of 5G. We have arranged hackathons, especially related to cybersecurity and satellite navigation. We are strongly working with connectivity for transport and transport automation. And we have also a program for ICT, climate and environment, so a strategy for a national strategy for ICT, climate and environment. So this just to give a short overview. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi, for providing a grand design and linking 6G with the societal aspects. I think with your advice, Trafficon is in good hands. Thank you for this. With that, we finished the introductory round of discussions. And I think that's a good moment to see whether we have questions from the floor.
No questions yet.
No questions yet. In this case, I have, of course, prepared a question. It's a question to all panelists. Do you think that with 6G coming to the marketplace, we will have a global internet as we all know it and as we're all used to it? Or will we move towards a kind of splinternet scenario with fragmented internets? Is that something which do you think might happen? Think of developments like new IP coming and other things, the politicization of the internet, the discussion about internet governance, etc. Any views on that? Is somebody here who want to take this up?
Well, I could reply on that from more like the network and wireless access perspective. I think the work with non-terrestrial components is really, really important in 5G and 6G. So we really have expectations for connectivity on land, at sea, in the air, and in space from 6G. So I really hope, and this is a challenge for the researchers now to solve. Thanks.
Thank you, Heidi.
I may just offer a comment. I think there are, as we know, tendencies in this direction of you know, not just country firewalls and so on, which limits the access to 6G, but also, I mean, to internet. But I'm not really sure. So I'm not really sure that the 6G necessarily will bring on this dimension per se, but it will be part of our scene and development in any case. And of course, that is challenging us in many deep ways, because we just assume that so many aspects of how this globalized world hang together was based on notions of openness and capacity to communicate through the internet. So absolutely, that is a very pressing challenge. But I'm not really sure that 6G will drive it as such.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Any more comments on this? Yeah, Kostas.
Yeah, thank you, Georg. Well, of course, it's very difficult to predict the future, but I believe 6G will expand the capacity and speed of the networks further compared to 5G, for example, to enable applications with significantly higher networking requirements, such as real-time digital twins, full autonomous driving, maybe personal body area networks. So 6G will move the focus from machines to human beings and to their interaction with the environment around them by supporting a highly available, reliable, and secure communication with a dynamic, intelligent infrastructure. So this is more or less how I would see the future with regards to 6G and what 6G will bring. But of course, as I said, difficult to predict the future with such a dynamic technology in front of us.
Thank you, Kostas. Gerard.
Just one very short comment. The openness of the network is something which I would say very much fits into the three circles framework I modestly, immodestly maybe suggested. This is something Europe should absolutely focus on. And Professor Bolin emphasized that the internet has to remain internet for all. The one obstacle, like you said just at the beginning, is the cost of deployment of 6G. And if costs are too high, and if prices for consumers are too high, there could be a de facto digital divide. And so, this is the kind of concern we in Europe should really focus on. And I'm sure our regulators are aware of this. Our governments sometimes do not see they see the results. So they say, oh, internet, the new technologies leave people on the side of the road. But our governments, first of all, should stop considering telecom operators are cash cows, and this will help people not to be left on the side of the road.
Thank you, Gerard. In the meantime, I've seen that we have a question from our audience. The question is how collaborative regulation will encompass the ICT impacted verticals. I think this is a question which either Heidi or Kostas would take up as regulators. How do you see that?
I'm not really sure I understand the question.
I'll read it again. How collaborative regulation will encompass the ICT impacted verticals? So I think it's actually two questions in one. The first is, what is meant by collaborative regulation? I think I would interpret this as the BEREC system, because that's the collaborative regulation, the regulatory system. And how will that impact the verticals? If there is any, maybe there is no impact on the verticals. I don't know. This is up to the discussion.
Maybe I can give Heidi some time to think about it, because my interpretation of the question is this: the operator. There has been some innovation in the latest round of spectrum allocation and assignment regarding verticals, and many, not all, but possibly most, and I'm sure our regulators today know more, have taken initiatives to put aside some spectrum in the C-band for verticals. Not all of them, and I would say in a parallel but not really coordinated manner. So this has been good. There has been many debates about this, and even more debates I'm not aware of, because I'm sure they have taken place. They have taken place behind closed doors. Whether it's the right thing to do to allocate directly spectrum for verticals on a local basis, and by bypassing the standard assignment procedures. Many countries are doing this. I must admit, and this is a question I ask you, I don't have a clear picture of what happened. I remember maybe a year and a half ago, I read 97 such licenses have been awarded in Germany. Is it true? Is it not? What are those licenses really in operation? Same in the UK, same in France. And it's true that in a way, and this is the second aspect of the question, it would be good to have coordination because we, among EU countries on this, because we have competition issues, and so some industrial companies should not be treated differently, better or worse in some European countries than in others concerning their access to spectrum. So this is a real question. I personally don't have the facts. I don't have the answers.
Yeah, well, I think I had an answer to that already in my presentation. What we are working on, we have awarded spectrum for local and for verticals in the 2.3 gigahertz band. That's mostly used now for 4G and also in the 25 gigahertz band. But there is a clear demand for spectrum now. As we have released spectrum in those bands, there have become a new demand for spectrum in the mid band. And also the discussion about having some kind of harmonized band in Europe for local networks. And we really put our hopes into this 3.8 to 4.2 gigahertz band, and will definitely assign that to verticals whenever possible. But we want to follow the European work and to see find the common solutions for this.
Kostas, any comments from your side?
Yeah, well, I would agree that the message from the question is not very clear to me, but what I would say is collaborative regulation is the, let's say, next generation regulation. Sometimes 5.0, it's called collaborative or 5.0 regulation. So a regulation that aims at promoting innovation and includes stakeholders in regulatory discussions. So from that point of view, regulatory sandboxes that I have discussed during my opening statement would fit in this collaborative regulation framework, as well as regulation 5.0. What I would say is that, as I mentioned in my opening statement, spectrum allocation is one of the topics that could be considered in the context of regulatory sandboxes. And spectrum allocation has to do with verticals that will be developed in the framework of 6G. So from that point of view, this could be a topic for collaborative regulation for 6G. I mean, how to handle spectrum for different verticals, and maybe give some regulatory breaks for verticals to be developed or to be evaluated first.
Thank you, Kostas. That raises another question from my side, because this question from this gentleman from the audience about collaborative regulation is a little bit ambiguous, so you can extract a lot of different questions out of it. So my question to the panelists would be, and in particular to the both regulators sitting here, do you think as we go along the trajectory of the regulatory system, that we will have more alignment among regulators in the future, or more kind of diversity and finer granularity regulation here and there? Annemarie Sipkes, the BEREC chair, she alluded to that this morning at the FTTH conference, when she pointed out that the situation in the member states are so different, so therefore regulation have to take care about this. So what is your view at this? Will we have greater alignment in the sense of creating a digital single market, or more granularity and differentiation? I think, Kostas, this is a question for you as the incoming chairman.
Well, again, it's very difficult. I can tell it's very difficult to predict the future about alignment of regulators with regards to a future technology. What I see and what we have seen in BEREC, and you know from your own experience, I mean, in frameworks like BEREC's framework, the purpose is to have an exchange of experiences, some cases, some know-how that can be shared among regulators, and repeat good practices in different countries, also taking into consideration special needs and special features in each country. But I'm not certain. It would be very difficult to say about a full alignment or a more granular approach among different regulators with regards to 6G. I think always collaboration among regulators and sharing good practices, experiences, common issues is always good. But the extent to which regulators would be aligned with regards to 6G, I think we should have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you, Kostas. In the meantime, I see that our audience is warming up, and we have 2 new questions coming. The first question is, will AI create new kinds of regulation requirements? I think, without responding to that question, the European Commission, as I said in my intro statement, is proposed a very comprehensive set of legal framework for AI regulation. But I'll leave it to our panel to discuss this. And the second question is, do we really want to license spectrum for 6G? Would it be better adopted if new spectrum is unlicensed, like Wi-Fi, especially for small cells? So who would like to take up the first question? New kind of regulation requirements for AI. The second one, licensed spectrum versus unlicensed.
Maybe I can comment on the first one about AI regulation, if you wish.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, as I said in my opening statement, with regards to 6G, I believe that 6G will be the network where AI will be well integrated in the network. We will be the first radio technology that will extensively utilize AI techniques, both on the core side, in its core network, but also on the radio access network. Issues like signal conditioning, power saving, and more. What we need what I see with regards to AI, of course, there is the European proposal for AI regulation framework, but we need to see a difference between 2 points with regards to AI. One is the use of AI as a tool to process data, and the other is AI as an optimization tool for the network itself. As I said, for example, in the case of 6G radio access network, to be used as a tool to save energy, to analyze the traffic and introduce some power saving modes. So there are different ways for AI to be considered in the context of a network like 6G. So one way is as a tool to process data collected. The other way is as a tool that will be used to optimize the network itself and the operation of the network itself. And this is something I really see a case for AI in 6G.
Thank you, Kostas. let's probably move to the second question. Do we really want to license spectrum for 6G, and would it be better to adopt new spectrum unlicensed like Wi-Fi? I think would you like to take this up?
Yes, thank you. Good question. I think we need both. We need to have the licensed spectrum and the unlicensed spectrum, and we will more and more also see services 5G and 6G in the unlicensed spectrum bands. But I think that also there are demands for having some kind of license, or maybe light license, also to protect the investments. We have seen that when we opened the 2.3 gigahertz band for local networks, there was a discussion about sharing with the cordless cameras, and people said it cannot be the case that we need to close our 4G network if there is a camera. If this is secondary use, the LTE networks. So you really want to have some protection for your investments. And the same, Finland has suggested for the 66 to 71 gigahertz band, which is an unlicensed band. We have suggested that there will be some kind of light licensing or registration for that, to protect to give some kind of protection against harmful interference for the 5G networks that will be implemented in that band, because we had a strong opinion from the field of that, and we could really see this. So I think we need a mix, but we also have very good examples already also seen today in this conference on how you can use the unlicensed spectrum to build networks. So we need them all, and we will have a more heterogeneous palette of different ways of implementations and licensing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. And I think you pointed out very well that a world in which dreaming of a world which is everything is unlicensed would lead to chaos and interference, and nothing would work then anymore. And of course, investment would not be protected. Would Eric or Gerard also give a comment on this question? Because you both alluded to spectrum licensing and awarding.
Yeah, well, I just say the brief comment that the question posed, will there be new needs for spectrum assignment, to rethink that, and that I think yes, but I don't think that we need to transit to unlicensed, but there will be license still there, but we just need to rethink what's going to happen. So I'll end with that.
Yeah. Gerard, any comment from your side?
The Dr. Amanen just said it. It's not a choice between the two. Obviously, the two licensed and unlicensed are quite complementary, and we have learned in the past 20 years to use both to the best effect. So we shouldn't, well, referring to unlicensed, is very much California in the 90s and flowers in your hair. So it works, but not as a general organization of the mobile industry. So.
Thank you. Well said. Yeah, to be mindful of the time, we have only 1 minute left, and I think that's a good opportunity as we do not have more questions in the Q&A. I think to wrap up very briefly, as we have learned from this very interesting discussion, we will face new challenges with 6G coming to the marketplace, and we will not be able now to predict all the challenges. It will remain very interesting and challenging for both regulators, the industry, telecoms operators, the verticals, the industry which is using industrial networks. And let me close the discussion by saying a big thank you to all the speakers for the time and sharing their insights. Thank you very much.